A man whose life flashed before his eyes, from a weekend spent with the love of his life, visiting a quiet, tourist town, indulging in the historical landmarks, walking amongst the city life, and staring at the water that gives them ease and tranquility. Truly, a simplistic and casual mundane everyday task, but for the both of them, it meant every single second. While this was a moment of peace and serenity, nothing lasts forever. In his past, James Sunderland was an everyday man working as an office clerk for a menial, dead-end job, trying to make ends meet, presumably in South Ashfield, as his father, Frank Sunderland, was the head apartment superintendent at South Ashfield Heights. One day, James went to a friend's house party and met a girl named Mary Shepherd. The two would spark a fire as they bonded mutually and immediately became infatuated with one another. Gradually, this resulted in a healthy and stable relationship. During this time, James would occasionally listen to Mary play the piano, as it was one of his favorite pastimes to indulge in and spend time with her. Even though Mary was self-conscious about her ability to play the piano as it was amateur at best, James still loved seeing and hearing her play. At some point in their relationship, James and Mary decided to take a trip to the town of Silent Hill, specifically the town of Southvale, as they encountered a brochure advertising row after row of quaint old houses, a gorgeous mountain landscape, and a lake which shows different sides of its beauty with the passing of the day. Enamored with the description, they took a chance and visited the town, residing in the Lakeview Hotel in room 312. During their vacation, James had a video camera and at some point recorded Mary, taping a video of her reminiscing about their time in the town. Mary comments on how this town used to be a sacred place and tells James to promise her they come back together again one day. Shortly after, Mary would cough aggressively. What could be written off as a simple cough would only lead to years of pain and suffering for both James and Mary. After their visit to Silent Hill, Mary would tragically be diagnosed with a terminal illness. While it's never explicitly stated nor confirmed, the former voice actor for James Sunderland, Guy Seehee, believes it could be melanoma, a serious skin cancer. With the aftermath of this tragic news, Mary would endure pain and suffering, often resulting in miscommunication and emotional manipulation towards James, as she would lash out at him in anger, resulting in verbal abuse whenever James visited Mary at the hospital to support her. Desperately searching for answers, James would have a conversation with Mary's primary doctor, asking him if Mary could be cured of her terminal illness and if there's any other solution that could help her. The doctor bluntly tells James that there's nothing else they can do, and Mary would only have 3 years left to live. Trying to compensate for a definitive answer, James would search endlessly through medical literature for a form of a long-term or successful treatment regarding for Mary's terminal illness, but unfortunately, to no avail. Realizing the weight and disparity of the situation, James comes to accept this harsh reality that his wife is dying and tries to make the best of it while he can. However, during these subsequent visits to see Mary, it would become less frequent due to Mary's relentless anger and hostility projected towards James, for the excruciating physical pain she felt, putting a strain on the relationship. To cope with his depression and loneliness, James would indulge in drinking alcohol to numb the pain he felt, to deal with the emotional disparity of his wife's verbal abuse, but more importantly, the fact of seeing his wife slowly wither away. For James, he slowly began to resent and see Mary as a burden, not necessarily because of the emotional turmoil Mary subjected James to enduring, but because he lost the love of his life and their plans for a full, happy life together. The emotional trauma and baggage left an everlasting impact on James, resulting in James eventually having a mental breakdown. This mental episode would result in James one day visiting Mary one last time, looking at her intently and lovingly, with sadness and emptiness. As he kissed Mary on the forehead, he would abruptly grab her pillow and suffocate her, until she stopped screaming and was no longer breathing. James would kill his wife, Mary. This deed would leave him to break and deteriorate, leaving James to experience a form of psychosis. Upon her death, James would carry Mary's corpse to place her in his car in the back passenger seat, putting a blanket over her body. Remembering Mary's wish that she made James promise, he decided to honor her wishes and take Mary to Silent Hill one final time. James would leave South Ashfield and drive off to Silent Hill. During the drive to the town of Silent Hill, James would experience derealization and cognitive dissonance, becoming detached from reality. Because of James' denial and selective memory in conjunction with the spiritual and supernatural nature of the town of Silent Hill, the town would produce a figment of James's delusions in creating a letter that James believes his wife wrote to him. In this letter, Mary tells James that she is waiting for him in their special place, hinting that she is waiting for him where everything began and ended, the Lakeview Hotel. Once arriving, James parks at the observation deck, overlooking Toluca Lake, then heads inside the men's restroom for a brief moment. In here, James looks intently at his hands as they shake. James then becomes tense and begins to experience derealization as he intently stares at himself in the mirror, touching the right cheek of his face with his hand, brushing slowly to see if he is still alive and if what he is experiencing is truly real. Before leaving the restroom, James looks at the end of the restroom stall to find a crude depiction of the demon Lilith containing Hebrew writing depicting Xenoi, Sanzanoi, and Samnagloth. In Jewish folklore, Lilith is a demon that is portrayed as a succubus of the night, often seen as threatening the sexual and reproductive aspects of life, such as preying on women in childbirth and children. Sanoi, Sanzanoi, and Samnagloth are depicted as three guardian angels with the sole purpose of acting as a safeguard against the actions of the demon Lilith. Those that contain Hebrew amulets with these three angels are known to be designed to protect women who are in childbirth. This is one of many allusions to Maria, the manifestation derived from James's subconscious in desiring a healthy and beautiful young Mary. Because of Maria's promiscuous nature, her personality can contain flirtatious and sexual advances towards James. To warrant this temptation on his behalf and wanting to engage in his desires with Maria, Maria could be seen as a demon, closely associating that with the demon Lilith, as she preys upon James to manipulate him emotionally and sexually dissuade him from his objective in finding Mary. Before James leaves for the cemetery, he goes to the driver's seat of his car to grab the map that contains a depiction of the forest trail leading to the town of South Vale. In the back seat of the car, James doesn't realize that it's actually Mary's corpse, paying no attention to or continuing recollection of the act that he was planning to do beforehand. While not revealed explicitly in the story, it's implied that James is going to commit a ritualistic act called shinju, a Japanese term for double suicide. The belief in Japanese culture is that lovers who commit suicide together would be rejoined in heaven, a view supported and conceived in the feudal teachings of the Edo period. Because of James' derealization and detachment from reality, he forgets his intentions of committing this act and instead holds on to the false reality of Mary's letter, alluding to her still being alive. Indulging in his delusions, James believes that Mary is possibly still alive, but expresses dismay as he recollects and monologues to himself the letter Mary sent him, and if she is truly still alive, waiting for him. Nevertheless, James commits to finding Mary and travels to the town of South Vale through the forest trail that leads to the cemetery. As James immerses himself in the forest and walks down the path, he stumbles upon a lonely well containing an ominous red square, staying afloat above the water. Mysterious and otherworldly, James looks into the red square, causing him to have a surreal moment where it feels as if somebody reached inside of his head, groping around his skull. As a gameplay element, the red square is used to save the player's progress, as it can be found in subsequent areas that James will visit throughout the story. Narratively speaking, the red square functions as a literal and figurative plot device that allows the player to view and reach inside James's memories, implying the red squares have a mental and psychological effect on James. When it comes to the town's spiritual power manifesting through such psychological effects, it works differently depending on the user's fears, thoughts, and memories derived from their subconscious. This is used to express how these delusions, derived from James's mental psychosis, are meant to be subtle foreshadowing. The memories that James suppresses and slowly builds up to remembering are painful and traumatic from his treatment of Mary, but also to subconsciously push him to reflect on his past actions of murdering his wife and come to the acceptance of the consequences he committed in his journey to forgiving himself. Once entering the cemetery, James finds himself wandering through the thick fog and finds a young adult teenage girl named Angela Orosco. James slowly creeps up to her in hopes of catching her attention, only to accidentally startle her, causing her to become shocked and confused in the heat of the moment. James apologizes and assures her that he is asking for help, as he is lost and needs to find the town of South Vale. Angela tells James to go down the road as it will lead to the town. James thanks Angela, but before he leaves, he is warned by Angela that the town is dangerous as there are monsters that infest the town. Much to her surprise, James bluntly states he doesn't care if it is dangerous or not, as he is looking for someone really important to him. Angela relates to his comment as she mentions she is looking for her mother. As they part ways, James wishes Angela good luck before moving along. Angela's story is a heartfelt cry of a victim of abuse, estranged from her father and brother as they enforced this physical and sexual abuse towards her, leaving her hopeless with nothing she could do. It's because of this act of disparity that caused this humiliation, self-hatred, and hopelessness towards the poor girl led to a life filled with despair and sorrow. Angela grew up in a poor and toxic family, primarily with her mother, father, and brother. Because of this violent, abusive, and traumatic family dynamic, Angela was emotionally deprived and manipulated so that she would never find happiness and live an endless cycle of pain and suffering. Her father, Thomas Orosco, was a lumberjack who was an aggressive alcoholic and violent in his behavior, specifically towards Angela. As she embraced and endured this abusive relationship with her father, he would often vocalize threats and manipulative statements to make her feel hopeless or alone in her ability to defend or take care of herself. With the bombardment of physical and sexual assaults towards Angela, this eventually molded her into fearing and resenting men, believing that her father's actions applied to all men, emotionally manipulating women to exact what they desire. Furthermore, Angela's brother would abuse her incestually, expediting her trauma and cementing her feelings she felt towards men. The only safety that Angela found that gave her a glimmer of hope was in her mother. However, this display of affection and warmth that she wanted was only met with the shame and beratement from her mother, as she reminded her that she deserved what happened to her, even turning a blind eye towards the acts from her father and brother toward her. At some point in time, Angela's little bit of hope would be completely tarnished as her mother would leave the family, resulting in Angela's hopelessness and leaving her with nothing but the continuous abuse from her father and brother. According to the Silent Hill 2 novelization, Angela was hired at a job where she worked as a waiter at a restaurant, which she despised due to the low minimum income, her distaste for the nauseating smell of meat, and the male customer's intentions when it came to groping or harassing her, in combination with the physical, verbal, and emotional abuse endorsed from not only her own family, but also the locals where she worked at. Angela came to a breaking point where she became suicidal, as she couldn't endure the torment and pain she suffered years prior. To hopefully cope with this pain by seeking help from a therapist, Angela was only prescribed antidepressants to ease the pain. This only frustrated Angela as she felt no one understood how she felt, as she didn't need medication but someone to understand her and possibly even save her. After graduating from high school, Angela would try to escape her father by running away from home, but this effort proved to be futile, as her father would eventually catch up to her and drag her back home. With all hope lost, she snapped and had a mental breakdown, resulting in her murdering her father with a knife, slitting his neck and slashing his torso numerous times. It's implied in the novelization that Angela also took care of her brother, but it's left ambiguous and up to the reader's interpretation of his fate. With her father murdered and presumably her brother, Angela escaped her family residence and ran away, with no one to turn to for help or nowhere else to go. Angela eventually found herself stumbling upon Silent Hill, as the town called to her. Silent Hill's supernatural power derived Angela's memories of her trauma, fears, and guilt, to manipulate her into creating this false pretense from disassociating herself from her previous acts of murdering her father, that her family was still alive, and specifically looking for her mother. Departing from the cemetery, James crosses Silent Hill Ranch to then enter an abandoned mechanic's shop to grab a key to unlock the door to the underpass. James then walks down a long, treacherous road to find himself finally at Southvale. Further down the road, James then encounters a mysterious figure wandering aimlessly through the thick fogs in the streets. Believing this is another human, or at the very least, someone other than him, James proceeds to follow the unknown figure as James commences his pursuit. He stumbles upon a stone called Remains of Blood Swamp. Upon reading, the following text has some parts redacted and hard to detail the full transcript. However, when uncovering the files from the original Silent Hill 2, it contains a fully legible script. With what's gathered, it details the story of a swamp called Blood Swamp. They got the title due to the town's executioners using the swamp as a means to wash their execution tools after performing a public execution. Because the swamp was used as a source to wash the executioner's tools, the blood from the tools polluted the swamp with blood, earning it the nickname. As James follows the bloody path, he's lured into the backyard of a house, having to further this pursuit of this ominous figure by crossing more backyards until he reaches the garage of a house. Once entering this house, James eventually finds a radio, which emits loud audio once a monster is nearby. This alerts the monster, known as the lying figure, to crash into the debris, face-planting headfirst onto the ground, urging James to think and act quickly, grabbing a makeshift weapon that is called the wooden plank. The lying figure is a physical manifestation derived from James's subconscious, a result of the memories James spent during his time hospitalizing a sick and terminally ill Mary. The term lying figure comes from a figure, Mary, lying on their deathbed, bedridden and rotting away. The appearance of the monster takes the form of a body bag, referring to a corpse that is disposed of when deceased. The movements of the lying figure represent a patient who is desperately squirming to be freed as it suffers in painful agony. An allegory of Mary's physical torment as she lies bedridden in the hospital bed, slowly withering away. According to Masahiro Ito, the design and inspiration of the lying figure were inspired by BDSM fashion, given the early designs with high-heeled boots and a straight jacket, revealing some skin. The final design was influenced by the painter Francis Bacon, particularly the painting called Study from the Human Body, Man Turning on the Light. Much like the rest of the monsters, Masahiro Ito created them to have a form of human-like qualities, such as their movement, to create an uncanny valley effect. For the lying figure, he was inspired by his colleague who one day was wearing a jacket with a hoodie over his head, walking in a cool way while listening to his Walkman. After killing the lying figure, James eventually skips the building, only to find the radio emitting a loud static frequency, where he can vaguely hear a voice calling out his name. However, he doesn't know who this voice could be. Before heading down the alleyway to the town of Southvale, James finds a corpse lying in a pool of blood and bodily-like fluids. The dead bodies are hard to describe, as they are heavily mutilated and beyond recognition, as the game intentionally makes it difficult to see the corpse's face. However, there are subtle details that give a hint that the clothing worn by the corpse bears a striking resemblance to James himself. This implies that the bodies found throughout the story are supposed to be delusions of James, derived from his subconscious desire to receive punishment for the act inflicted onto Mary. It's a theme that's seen throughout the story that sees James' thoughts personifying this idealization of desiring potential death, suicide, and punishment for his wrongdoings. Close by the dead body, James finds a matchbook with a Bar Neely's print, hinting that he needs to investigate the building to continue his search for Mary. Once entering Bar Neely's, James is met with an ominous message that looms over him, written in red text that reads, "There's a hole here, it's gone now." If we were to interpret this message without context, it's hard to decipher and understand what this message could possibly mean. However, because of the town's supernatural nature, manifesting much of the user's subconscious thoughts into physical form, the message could be tied to James's psyche. This can be supported by the messages that taunt James, lambasting him for his actions, serving as an allegory for James literally seeking out an escape to run from his misfortunes, but cannot use the holes to hide himself from his guilt and the truth. The message can also be interpreted as figurative to guide James in the right direction in his journey to find Mary. There are also the literal holes James stumbles upon when it comes to either putting his hand into a deep hole to grab an item, or his encounter with the holes he needs to jump down into, from Silent Hill Historical Society into Toluca Prison, and eventually the Labyrinth. James's lack of care and having a conscious thought of jumping down these holes that are clearly dangerous rivals his mortality, as it expresses his lack of self-care and self-worth when it comes to committing these very rash and dangerous actions. It could also be seen as a metaphor for James, literally and figuratively speaking, digging deeper into his memories to recollect his painful and traumatic experiences with Mary during her illness by reaching into the depths of his mind to reach the truth. Inside Neely's bar, James uncovers a jukebox which has a broken vinyl record. From here, he needs to find 3 items: Neely's bar coin at Texan Cafe, the other half of the broken vinyl record in vinyl glue at Groovy's Music, and finally, the jukebox button at Saul Street Apartments. Once all these 3 items are acquired, James can properly combine the broken vinyl with vinyl glue and insert it into the jukebox player, playing their vinyl record. Once the record plays, James gets a flashback to a time when he and Mary both visited Rosewater Park, spending the whole day there observing Toluca Lake. Once the song finishes playing, James receives Neely's bar key. Once using this key on the back door of the bar, James continues to the back alley where he encounters the creepers. Popular to the contrary belief, the creepers aren't derived from James's subconscious, whereas the other monsters roaming Silent Hill are instead manifestations that are derived from his guilt, trauma, or desires. The creepers are rather manifestations that are from the collective unconscious minds of people who resided in Silent Hill. This is potentially due to the residue effect from the events of the previous entry, Silent Hill, which derived from Melissa Gillespie, who had a strong dislike for insects. The literal reason as to why the creepers make an appearance in James's story is due to Masahiro Ito, series monster designer, wanting to pay homage to the first entry, hence portraying the creeper as a residue effect. bordering into James's Silent Hill. Once reaching the end of the alleyway, James finds the Wiltse apartment's key. Moments later, the environment changes from a calm, thick-layered fog to a raging, violent storm of fog, obscuring James's vision whilst becoming surrounded by lying figures. Without a moment to lose, James rushes to Wiltse apartments and uses the key to enter inside. Once inside the lobby, James enters the safe room to uncover the coin cabinet puzzle, and he'll need to find the man, woman, and snake coins to properly solve the puzzle. From here, James descends to the stairwell to the second floor to room 202, where a bright, beaming flashlight is found on Mary's dress, which James seems to be familiar with the dress itself, however, can't seem to remember completely. Once the flashlight is equipped, it allows James to have a more illuminated field of vision in dark environments. Upon retrieving the flashlight, this immediately alerts the next monster James encounters, called the Mannequin. The Mannequins are a manifestation of James's suppressed urges and inclinations, derived from his desire for lust he felt for Mary, presumably due to the lack of sexual activity the relationship once had. However, due to Mary's illness, leaving her bedridden, this left James felt guilty for desiring such inclinations from his sexuality, which manifested into physical form as the Mannequin. Sexuality encompasses much of the Mannequin's design in the context of James's memories during his stay at the hospital with Mary, which is why it contrasts with a medical mannequin dummy. The monster design features an emphasis on the legs, particularly referring to the leg braces, or more specifically, orthoses. During Mary's illness, she needed to wear leg braces to help her with her mobility as she presumably lost function in both of her legs. Coincidentally, the design of the mannequin bears a resemblance to the mannequin dolls by Polish-German artist Hans Bellmer, particularly his surrealist imagery of life-size female dolls. However, Masahiro Ito retracts from these claims, and instead reveals that the inspiration for the mannequins came from traditional Japanese folklore, specifically the Ashinaga Tanaga, a pair of yokai in Japanese folklore. The term Ashinaga Jin refers to the yokai that has extremely long legs, while the other yokai, Tanaga Jin, has extremely long arms. Because the mannequins are harassed and executed by Pyramid Head later on in Wiltse apartments, it could come off as a disturbingly sensitive scene with its presentation, as it appears as if Pyramid Head is simply harassing the mannequins due to the erotic behavior. However, this isn't the case, as Pyramid Head's actions are to punish and execute, as he is a manifestation derived from James's desire to be punished and forced to remember his past actions. After defeating the mannequin, James acquires the chute courtyard key inside the drawer. He then heads back to the lobby to use the key to enter the outside courtyard. Once outside, James then enters through the window into room 112. Inside the apartment, James finds a newspaper article titled, "Locane Siblings Murder, Perpetrator Commits Suicide in Custody." This newspaper article details a homicide case of the serial killer, Walter Sullivan, who recently murdered the Locane siblings, Billy and Miriam Locane. Walter Sullivan is featured as the main antagonist of Silent Hill 4, where he's seen orchestrating the 21 Sacraments ritual to resurrect his mother to be with her once again after she abandoned him in the apartment room 302 at Ashfield Heights. The murders of Billy and Miriam Locane are one of many murders needed to be performed as a sacrificial offering to commence the ritual. While James cautiously explores the first floor of Wiltse apartments, he is met with a barred fence blocking the hallway to reach the other side. On the opposite end of the barred fence, he finds a hallway key. With not much else he can do, James tries to reach out and grab the key, but is immediately met with a little girl who kicks the key away from him. Due to this inconvenience, James has to backtrack to the eastern hallway of the first floor to acquire the hallway key. Once James retrieves the key, he heads into room 108 to collect the golden apple. James once again backtracks to the second floor and uses the hallway key to enter and explore the second floor of Wiltse apartments. As he roams through the dark, linear hallways, James comes to find a dark, ominous figure behind a barred fence as he stares menacingly at James. This monster is known as Red Pyramid Thing, or more commonly associated as Pyramid Head. Masahiro Ito envisioned Pyramid Head as a monster who would always serve a purpose and a meaningful role in the overarching narrative of Silent Hill 2. Serving as a parallel to James Sunderland as one of James's physical manifestations, he is brought to life through James's subconscious, warranting to be punished for the crimes and sins he committed against his wife, Mary. Because of this desire, Pyramid Head would be James's executioner of Judgement. In Silent Hill Historical Society, the painting, Misty Day, Remains of Judgement, serves as the inspiration for James subconsciously awakening Pyramid Head. Pyramid Head is derived from the town's executioners from its early history, specifically the cult's Valtiel sector. The monster takes a similar appearance to the executioners of the town's cult, with a red rusted, pyramid-shaped helmet over his head, donning a butcher's wardrobe, black leather boots, and white executioner's gloves. Furthermore, the town's executioners would hang anyone deemed with sin, resulting in their punishment being death. Misty Day, Remains of Judgement, is a warped painting of the town's executioners, manifesting the monster Pyramid Head. Although Pyramid Head appears as an antagonistic role, given his hostile and brutal nature directed towards James, in reality, he exists to humanize James and to help him realize that he is guilty, often attacking other monsters to fulfill his role. The scene where James hides in the closet from Pyramid Head abusing the mannequins represents the conflict in his mind. His fear of facing his inner demons manifested itself as Pyramid Head attacking other monsters to remove the vision from his psyche. As Takayoshi Sato explains, psychological horror has to shake a human's heart deeply. Shaking people's hearts deeply means uncovering people's core emotion and their core motivations for life. Everybody is thinking and concerned about sex and death. Everything. If we want to scare, shake, or touch the users or spectators, then we have to think deeply about sex and death. To make it like a death scene, somebody died or monsters died. We try to mix erotic essence. This is kind of a visual and a core concept. After encountering Pyramid Head, James stumbles upon room 217 to find the handgun. After acquiring the handgun, James finds himself re-entering room 213 to find a dead body sitting directly in front of a TV. After witnessing this eerie sighting, James gets the room 212 key. Using the room 212 key, James cautiously wanders through the linear, decayed rooms on the second floor. He eventually reaches room 208 to use the golden apple key to unlock a hidden room plagued with cryptic and nonsensical scribbles and writings. These incomprehensible writings would provide James with a code to unlock the locker safe, which holds the steel key to exit room 206 and the man coin. Once James exits the room, he then gets the 2F small staircase key to reach the stairwell. James goes to the third floor to acquire the second coin, having to once again squeeze through tight crevices and claustrophobic rooms filled with monsters that James must fight. He eventually reaches the laundry room where he finds and uses the canned juice and throws it in the trash chute to apply enough force to empty out the trash, releasing the second coin. Once outside, James retrieves the woman coin. James then has to go through the first floor to reach room 116, where he finds a man deceased inside a refrigerator. Elsewhere in the same room, he hears an unknown person vomiting profusely in the bathroom. As James opens the bathroom door, he finds and meets a man vomiting after witnessing the corpse inside the fridge, causing him to immediately become nauseous and vomit from the disgusting sight. He quickly reassures James that he didn't kill the man, with James calming him gently and assuring him that he believes him. The man reveals his name to be Eddie, and that he found himself wandering into the town, but quickly retreated into the apartments to escape the monsters. James suggests that Eddie escape the town while he still can, as it's dangerous. Eddie agrees and asks James if he'd like to team up to have a better chance at escaping. While not entirely disagreeing, James apologizes as he's still looking for someone and can't leave just yet. James wishes Eddie good luck and to be safe. Eddie Dombrowski is seen as a mentally disturbed, insecure, and unstable young adult whose past is derived from severe bullying from his physical appearance, particularly being overweight, having been laughed at and picked on ever since his youth. In the Silent Hill 2 novelization, it reveals that Eddie, at some point in his youth, worked out as a part-time gas station employee. According to Eddie, he views his life as shitty, not caring if he isn't deemed as attractive by women due to his physical appearance, but is insecure and spiteful over being made fun of and laughed at for being overweight. Growing up in school was hard for him, as he was constantly picked on and bullied by his peers. The bullying happened on a consecutive basis. It got so bad that Eddie was forced to plead and beg on his knees to stop the bullying from happening. This bullying eventually led to Eddie garnering this insecurity, self-consciousness, and hatred over himself, but more specifically, shifted the blame to those who looked down upon him. Eddie can be evaluated and seen struggling with body dysmorphia with how he perceives his physical appearance, and an eating disorder, likely to cope with the persistent bullying by indulging in his eating habits as a form of comfort to escape his pain. Eddie held contentment for one bully who harassed and physically assaulted him over the years during and even after graduating from high school. The persistent, aggressive contact the bully held against Eddie for many years led to him finally snapping and reacting violently. In retaliation, Eddie uses his father's revolver to kill the bully's dog and shoots him in the leg, although only incapacitating him and never killing him. In a state of panic and adrenaline, Eddie escapes and stumbles in the town of Silent Hill. After his encounter with Eddie, James finds himself outside the pool area, In an empty pool lies a baby carriage alone with a snake coin. With all 3 coins in hand, James inserts each individual coin into the correct placement to solve the coin desk puzzle. When solved, he receives the Room 201 key. Using the Room 201 key, James finds a recreation of James and Mary's apartment, a manifestation of his memories spent with Mary before and after her terminal illness, with a texture that looks burnt and withered, which is directly tied to and a subtle foreshadowing of the fires and burnings of Lakeview Hotel. Elsewhere in the room is the bed where Mary laid bedridden, seeing James having to take care of her before she eventually succumbed to her death. Exploring the apartment, James finds a handkerchief that is likely a memento from Mary. When observing, he is caught off guard by the sounds of a falling mannequin. As he creeps and peeks behind the wall, he finds Pyramid Head once again, manhandling and aggressively executing the mannequins. Pyramid Head's actions serve as a reflection of James's inner fears and state of mind, manifested as a reminder of his guilt and transgressions, resulting in Pyramid Head being the parallel to his conflict of his inner psyche, which is him actively choosing not to face his inner demons. Hence, James hiding in the closet symbolizes his fear facing his crimes and sins he committed, which is symbolically visualized through Pyramid Head abusing the mannequins. While hiding in the closet, James uses the handgun to attempt to kill Pyramid Head, but to no avail. Pyramid Head stands there watching James menacingly. He reacts violently as he moves sporadically, resulting in the monster leaving James to himself. After this encounter, James opens a door that leads to a large gap between Wiltse Apartments and Blue Creek Apartments. Seeing no other choice, James crosses the gap into Blue Creek Apartments. Once inside, James eventually stumbles upon a grandfather clock puzzle where he must find the minute hand, the hour hand, and the second hand in their respective locations. After using a valve to break open the radio containing the hour hand, James backtracks to the grandfather clock to solve the first part of the puzzle, unlocking the H door to proceed and find the minute hand. Eventually, James must reach inside a filthy, putrid toilet bowl to grab the minute hand. Once acquired, James then has to collect items to solve a swan seesaw puzzle to get the wing key, to then open the door next to him and jump down to room 110. James then stumbles upon room 109, where he meets Angela, lying down on her side, staring at herself in the mirror with soulless, empty eyes, while she handles a kitchen knife. Once Angela sees James, she vaguely remembers him from earlier, however, with little care given her response and her tone. James sees Angela holding the knife, telling her that while he doesn't know her intentions, he reassures her that there's always another way. Angela responds that it's easier to run away from your problems instead of facing them head on, referring to her and James as they are afraid. James refutes this by stating that they're not the same, while Angela says that they are the same, and asks if he is scared, implying that he's scared of facing his inner demons and the guilt that he has yet to uncover, due to his dissociative and repressed memories of his act against Mary. Her response also refers to herself, as Angela is no stranger to her pain and trauma, dealt by her father and brother's abuse they inflicted onto her. Angela's mannerisms imply her suicidal tendencies and nihilism due to the unforgiving past that she suffered, projecting this pain onto James without giving much context to her situation, likely due to the distrust she has of her men, given the toxic and abusive relationship she had with her father and brother. James then asks if Angela found her mother, which results in her becoming defensive, asking James how he would know that her mother is in this town. James responds that it's rather a simple guess, as he wouldn't know otherwise. Angela apologizes and says that she hasn't found her mother. Angela asks if James found the person he's looking for, to which James responds in dismay as he hasn't yet, but also reveals that his wife has been dead for over 3 years, trying to not only reassure Angela, but also himself that he isn't going crazy. Frightened by his response, Angela walks away to leave the room. Before she could leave, James asks if she's going to be carrying that knife. Angela responds that if she holds onto it, she doesn't know what she'd end up doing with it, asking James to hold onto it for her. As Angela gives James the knife, out of nowhere, she has an unexpected traumatic response when James reaches out to her, presumably from past trauma of her being sexually assaulted by her father and brother, reacting as sort of a defense mechanism towards men who try to violate her. Regaining her self-control, Angela apologizes and leaves the room. James then picks up the knife on the table and holds onto it. In doing so, this triggers James' subconscious to derive his suicidal thoughts, as his original intention earlier was to commit double suicide with Mary. Because Pyramid Head is James's executioner, Pyramid Head is then equipped with a great knife, serving as a connection to James, which symbolically serves as 2 shears of a pair of scissors, representing the duality between Pyramid Head and James, being one and the same. With a return to the grandfather clock, James inserts the minute hand and solves the next part of the puzzle, unlocking the M door. Entering room 202, James must solve a cryptic mathematical formula for the mouth combination lock. When solving the puzzle, James retrieves the second hand. Returning to the grandfather clock, James inserts the second hand and finally solves the puzzle. Heading downstairs, James finds the S door where Pyramid Head awaits him in a small arena. With no other option, James must fight Pyramid Head. During the battle, a loud siren goes off, stopping Pyramid Head from pursuing James in combat, to which we see the monster slowly leave through the doors. Back outside in the streets of Southvale, James encounters a little girl sitting on top of a wall. James recounts a little girl who kicked the key away from him previously in Wiltse Apartments, concluding that she was the same one who committed the action. The little girl in question is named Laura. James asks Laura what a little girl like herself is doing in the town all alone, to which she mockingly responds with the same question, frustrating James with her rude behavior. Before she leaves, Laura then responds abruptly with a comment telling James that he never loved Mary, confusing him with how she knew about Mary. As opposed to the other characters who hold onto their guilt, fears, and darkness inside of their hearts, Laura is rather the opposite, as she's the innocence that is a contrast to those who lost it long ago. Because she's an innocent child who isn't witness to a dark, troubling past, whose suppressed inner thoughts hold darkness, Laura is seen as an outlier, devoid of seeing the monsters roaming the town, and the abnormalities of the supernatural fog world or otherworld. This is implied through the subsequent interactions she has with James, when he mentions the dangers the town possesses, when he worries for her safety, in which she reacts in confusion as she doesn't know what James is talking about, as she doesn't bear witness to what James sees. Laura's backstory is seen of her time she spent in the hospital with Mary, as they were neighbors who quickly became friends. Laura is an orphan as her parents died before she was admitted to the hospital for an unknown reason that is never disclosed. Because of Mary's motherly nature, likely expressed due to her desire to have a child of James, Laura saw Mary as a mother figure. When she was with Laura, Mary reminisced and fixated on her time at Silent Hill with James, as she talked to Laura about how much she loved her visit and wished to go back with him. Tragically, while Laura made a close friend, this friendship wouldn't last, as Mary would pass away without Laura knowing. At some unspecified time, Laura would escape her orphanage and travel to Silent Hill. According to Silent Hill Chronicle, Book of Lost Memories, it reveals that she would happen to cross paths with Eddie by chance, as he too would be driving there in his white van, offering her a ride as they both traveled together. Upon arriving, Laura was determined to find Mary, much like James. After leaving James to himself, he finally reaches Rosewater Park in hopes of potentially finding Mary waiting there for him. As James reaches the boardwalk at the end of the pier, he finds a blonde-haired woman wearing a red leather vest, a black tight dress, and leather boots. The girl introduces herself as Maria. Hearing this, James gets whiplash and confusion from her appearance, as it eerily resembles his late wife, Mary. At first glance, Maria deems a resemblance to Mary almost if she could be her identical twin. While the odds of this may come off as coincidental, this is by no means an accident. As James vocalized earlier, he mentions that Maria looks just like Mary, which is due in part to Maria being a manifestation that is derived from James's subconscious. Maria takes the physical appearance of a healthy, youthful, and extroverted version of Mary, which is a juxtaposition from the sick, disease-ridden Mary that was introverted, closed off, and bitter towards James. Maria was literally and figuratively born from a wish, as her sub-scenario implies, with James subconsciously desiring a healthy and lively Mary who doesn't suffer from her ill-fated disease, but also because James misses and longs for his wife upon her death, as at this point in time, he cannot let her go after mercifully murdering her. James's desire is also seen as an illusion, as Silent Hill possesses the power to project and manifest one's mental figments of imagination into reality. Maria is seen as one of the 9 delusions James sees throughout his story, who admittedly sees himself not caring if she's real or not. The morality of Maria's existence comes into question, as Maria herself, while born from James's subconscious as one of his delusions, bears the sentience when it comes to exacting control over her emotions and having existential thoughts over her purpose. When born into reality, in her sub-scenario, born from a wish, Maria is born in the back room of Heaven's Night, not knowing who she is or her purpose. She contemplates suicide as she points a revolver at the mirror. However, due to her desperation to wanting to find someone alive in the town filled with monsters, she decides to try and find anyone who is still in the town. This leads her to Baldwin Mansion, where she meets the ghostly apparition of a man named Ernest Baldwin. Their conversations are shared behind locked doors, as Ernest is apprehensive about Maria seeing him as he isn't physically present, but rather spiritually. Ernest arranges an agreement with Maria that if she gets him the white liquid, white chrism, for him to conduct a ritual in bringing back his deceased daughter, Amy, he'll point her in the direction where she'll find the purpose she's looking for. Maria then heads to Blue Creek Apartments to acquire the white chrism and returns to Ernest to give him the material he needs. As promised, Ernest reveals and implies a bad man named James, whom he states as the man who's looking for you that isn't you, implying that while James manifested these thoughts and desires for Mary, believing that a delusion, Maria, would fill in that void of loneliness he feels without his wife, isn't inherently what he wants deep down, and instead just wants Mary back again. Maria acknowledges this information regarding James and makes it her desire to search for him in desperation, and hoping to see if he accepts her for who she is, not Mary. With this context, it can be alluded that Maria's purpose is to win over James, which expresses this sexually flirtatious personality that is cheerful and energetic amongst their interactions with each other. However, there's also a different side of Maria that encompasses a dark and moody personality, which can see her lash out against James whenever he mentions Mary. Maria's bitterness and rudeness towards James are meant to be an allusion to Mary's personality when she was suffering with her illness, as she too was seen as emotionally manipulative and abusive as she projected her pain onto him. These subtle behavior shifts and differences in Maria's personality are meant to be ironic as she encompasses the demeanor of Mary, which illustrates James's inability to know what he truly wants. Maria is often associated with a moth, as moths are meant to be a personification of transformation of life, death, and reincarnation, which is meant to convey the rebirth of Mary through Maria. After a meeting, James decides to take off before Maria emotionally manipulates him into taking her with him, as she's scared and helpless in a town full of monsters, hinting that he needs to take care of her. James decides to have Maria tag along with him, as she mentions that she knows a special place that they can go to, where Mary could possibly be. With nowhere else to go, James lets Maria lead the way as they both head through West Southvale, making a stop at Jack's Inn. While here, James and Maria search room 108, with James finding a note leading to a clue to solving the locker safe in the reception area. Meanwhile, Maria finds an outfit that is a reference to her original outfit, making a subtle nod and joke, asking James if it looks good on her or not, to which he awkwardly hesitates in answering. In room 106, James feels a disturbance as the room they are in gives an uneasy feeling, with Maria telling him to loosen up and get a hold of himself. In reality, James's hunch about the room is correct, as it's later revealed to have secretly had the insignia of the Halo of the Sun, a religious symbol that represents the underground religious cult, the Order, representing the aspects of God, with the two outer circles representing charity and resurrection, and the three inner circles representing present, past, and future. As they leave the room, James enters the safe code for the locker safe and gets the gate key. Afterward, James and Maria use the gate key to access the streets of West Southvale. On their path, they encounter a household called the Baldwin Mansion, a reference to the owner, Ernest Baldwin. Outside of the front entrance on the porch lies an item called the White Chrism. This is one of 4 items needed to conduct a ritual to revive Mary's corpse in the rebirth ending. The other items are Crimson Ceremony, Obsidian Goblet, and Book of Lost Memories. This is meant to be a parallel and allusion to the Native Americans' practices in the early history of the town, which saw them practice exorcisms, converse with spirits in the afterlife, healing, and ritualistic ceremonies. James uses this as a foundation in conjunction with the town's place of silent spirits, referring to its supernatural power to resurrect Mary in the rebirth ending. Moving along the neighborhood in West Southvale, James and Maria find themselves at a dead end as the crater lies within their path. With no other option, James and Maria decide to take an alternate path. In doing so, they abruptly see the weather react violently, with the monsters becoming much more aggressive and hostile, surrounding them. Reacting fastly, James decides to lock the gate behind them with a wooden plank, and instead picks up a steel pipe as a melee weapon to compensate. James and Maria run through the back streets of the neighborhood in West Southvale to eventually stumble upon the back entrance of Heaven's Night as they successfully escape the immediate danger. Once arriving, Maria opens the back entrance of a key, which she unlocks, leading James inside. Following Maria, she suddenly disappears from James's sight, leaving him to wander the building to eventually find her again in the showroom. James reacts negatively to Maria playing with him, as he feels like she's being disingenuous as he needs to find Mary. Maria states that they need to take a break and time to relax before heading out to the horrors of the unknown. To ease the tensions in James's worries, Maria offers him a drink of alcohol. Reminded of his alcoholism during the time his wife was ill and used as a coping mechanism for his deep depression to drink the pain away, James reluctantly declines as he looks at the bottle intently. Once ready to leave, James and Maria depart for West Southfield streets again. Navigating the back alleys, James and Maria stumble upon the special place Maria referred to earlier at Rosewater Park. Maria retells the story of a woman who was cast out and sentenced to die on an island in a lake. A man who came to the town fell in love with her, sneaking out when he can to visit her. The woman would have a candle to illuminate the life in his path to help him find his way to her. The fairy tale is meant to serve as a parallel to James and Mary, seeing how the woman is meant to represent Mary, being the light in James's path to help eliminate the darkness in his journey, to reach the truth that he desperately desires in hopes of finding Mary. Once Maria finishes the story, James relents in frustration, disappointed that this isn't the special place he's looking for. As Maria reassures him, they both hear a scream, resulting in them quickly find themselves at Revere Theater. James decides to enter through the back entrance by a window to eventually stumble upon both Eddie and Laura talking to one another inside a theater booth. James watches from afar as both Eddie and Laura conversate, with Eddie making fun of Laura as she screamed in fear over a rat, while Laura counters this insult by calling him a gutless fatso. Much to his dismay, Laura questions Eddie while he's running away from the cops, to which Eddie exclaims that he got scared. Laura states that if he has nothing to hide from, then why would he be scared? After listening to their conversation, James finds Eddie alone to himself as Laura runs away after hearing James pushing a cabinet, alerting her. James asks Eddie if he is alone, only to hear Laura tampering with the theater equipment. James jokingly makes a comment to Eddie that he's happy that he got his appetite back, which only displeases Eddie as he's insecure about his appearance due to his eating disorder and body dysmorphia. James suggests to Eddie that both of them go after Laura, only for Eddie to refuse. Chasing after Laura through the theater, James eventually finds himself outside, meeting up with Maria. Maria tells James that she saw Laura running towards Brookhaven Hospital. Inside Brookhaven Hospital, they explore the front lobby, leading James to find an examination room with a code, which he uses to unlock the basement key. James and Maria find Laura drawing childish scribbles on the wall, only leading her to run away once again to the second floor, locking the door behind her. James and Maria head to the basement floor, requiring James to find an empty fuel can and need to fuel it with the oil to power the generator once again, to grant power to the elevator. Once on the second floor, James finds Maria fatigued and not well. Maria tells James that it's nothing, referring to her current state as a hangover, as she simultaneously proceeds to take medication, alluding to Mary's condition when she was terminally ill. James tells Maria to rest as he'll come back for her once he finds Laura. As James roams the second floor of the hospital, he cautiously walks through the darkness of the linear hallways and rooms, only to be introduced to a new monster that is dressed in a nurse's uniform with a humanoid-like appearance, with a notable quality to its unique bubble head. The bubble-like head is meant to be symbolic of Mary's swollen head, which is seen as deceased and grotesque, with her cancer-like tumors of sores that plagued her facial appearance. The violent shaking and twitching of the bubblehead nurses symbolizes screaming or shrieking, as if someone is using a bag to suffocate them. Furthering this allegory is a red square on their mouths, vocalizing Mary's insanity as her terminal illness worsened. The suffocation motif also connects to Mary's screaming as James suffocated her with a pillow, as she screamed in confusion and horror as she watched James kill her. The red squares also reaffirms the 9 delusions James encounters throughout his story. The baby-like face alludes to the idea that James and Mary wanted to have a baby of their own, which is solidified with Mary admitting in her letter to Laura that she would have adopted Laura if she weren't hospitalized and was healthy. As James continues to explore the second floor, he eventually finds a teddy bear that has a bent needle stuff inside. Elsewhere in the women's locker room is a shotgun, which James adds to his ever-growing arsenal of weaponry. Further down the hallways, James then enters the women's lounge to find the L1 room key on the coffee table. With the L1 room key, James accesses the utility room to then stumble upon a hole in the wall, which he jumps down into, leading him down to the first floor of the medical records room. And here, he acquires the marked bracelet. On the third floor, he gets the 1F inner ward key. Close by in the X-ray room, he finds a radiograph of a pelvis, which will be necessary to solve a puzzle and access a code. James then descends to the first floor yet again to the pool area to find a medical tube which he combines with the bent needle. With this makeshift device, James fishes out of the drain the maintenance key. James then uses the maintenance key on the trap door to turn off the valve to drain the water in the pool. After smashing a weak wall with the pipe, he accesses the bloodstained bracelet. Before ascending to the second floor, James visits the kitchen to find a mold remover, which he uses to remove the mold from a moldy radiograph. James then returns to the X-ray room to solve a puzzle involving the radiographs to get a code he needs to enter room D1, which has the filthy bracelet. With all 3 bracelets intact, James then heads to the director's office to solve a puzzle to acquire the director's storage room key. Inside the storage room, he finds the safe button and has to rearrange books to form the correct astrological symbols to get the correct code. Upon figuring out the astrological symbols and pressing the safe button, James then receives the rooftop key. At the rooftop, James finds a note on a page ripped from a diary. After reading this note, he is suddenly met by Pyramid Head, who strangles him by his throat and throws him down the shaft, landing on the 3rd floor to find Laura in one of the rooms. In this exchange between the two, James finds Laura in a room playing with a teddy bear. James asks Laura how she knows Mary's name, and after some hesitation, Laura reveals that she met Mary in the hospital last year. Infuriated, James lashes out against Laura, calling her a liar, as he knows that she died 3 years ago. Composing himself, James apologizes for lashing out at Laura. However, Laura seemed offended by James's rude behavior. James states that this hospital is no place for a kid and she might get hurt, to which Laura questions, by what? Implying that what Laura sees isn't exactly what James sees in Silent Hill. Before leaving the room, Laura tells James that she forgot a letter from Mary that she left in the other room. She tells James if he can get it for her, which he does. Laura leads James to a large, dark, ominous room, telling him the letter's in the back, only to lock him inside, teasing him. Unbeknownst to Laura, James then meets the next monster, called the Flesh Lips. The monster is a creature, bound by a lattice, a bed-like frame that contains a large, sack-like body bag, with legs sticking out from the bottom, as well as a visible mouth that is seen at the bottom of the sack. The mouth is a common, regular motif seen throughout the game, which is represented as Mary's verbal abuse when she would project her anger and frustration towards James. Interestingly, once James notices the mouth on the monster, he then finds that other monsters have mouths, such as the Mandarin. The Flesh Lip was inspired by Osamu Noguchi's deaf lynched figure and the 1976 photograph Man with No Legs by Joel Peter Witkin. The mouth is inspired by the painting Second Version of Triptych 1944 by Francis Bacon. After a grueling battle, James eventually defeats the Flesh Lip. As he inspects the monster, he abruptly gets abducted by another Flesh Lip. James wakes up in a gurney, framed to look up at the ceiling that is meant to symbolize Mary's time in a hospital bed as she was dragged around the hospital. James then finds himself in the other world, Brookhaven Hospital. Leaving the day room, James finds a sheet covering a box, soon revealed to be the next puzzle he must solve, called the Louise Box Puzzle. James must then go through a series of puzzles to acquire a passcode from the west and east wings, respectively, to then receive the Lapis Key as the final piece of the puzzle. Upon completing the puzzle, James suddenly finds the box empty, much to his disappointment. Behind him, a cloth falls down, revealing a statue of a woman, giving him the elevator button needed to access the basement floor. After heading down to the basement floor and acquiring the copper ring, James eventually regroups with Maria once again. Hearing Maria's voice, he mistakes her for Mary, leading him to apologize but glad she's still alive. Maria, finding his comment disingenuous, lashes out at James, telling him that she was left all alone and was scared that he wasn't there to save her, stating that he only cares about his dead wife and not her. After reconciling, Maria asks James if he has found Laura, only for him to reveal that she has once again run away. Maria tells James that they need to find her as she feels the need to protect her. James agrees and they go head off to find Laura. Later in the hospital, James and Maria encounter a refrigerator that he has difficulty opening. After some light teasing, Maria helps James open the refrigerator to find the lead ring. With both the copper and lead ring, James inserts them into the statue of the woman, unlocking a stairwell. Descending down the stairs, James and Maria find themselves roaming a dark, linear hallway. Suddenly, Pyramid Head abruptly appears, chasing after James and Maria, prompting a chase sequence. After James escapes into the elevator, Maria falls and trips behind him. James desperately holds the elevator doors open for Maria. However, she eventually succumbs to being brutally pierced by the Great Spear, dying right in front of James as she's dragged out by Pyramid Head. James falls to his knees, lying in defeat, after witnessing Maria die. This reinforces James's guilt he subconsciously feels from killing Mary, with Maria's death meant to torment him. James then finds himself back in Brookhaven Hospital, finding a room with the hospital entrance key, seeing Laura run away as she heads into the Otherworld South Vale. While navigating Otherworld South Vale, James eventually finds himself in a dark tunnel exploring an underpass, where he's then introduced to the next monster called the Mandarin. The monster is usually seen hanging underneath a mesh grating, using its strong, suction cup-like forearms to move around underneath the platform to attack James. They typically use their tongue-like tendril to inflict damage by stabbing James when caught in their sights. The Mandarin is meant to be symbolic of James's feelings, these feelings making him feel trapped and suffocated from Mary's everlasting verbal abuse enforced onto him, as he listened to her violently and angrily project those feelings of pain and sorrow onto him. Much like the Flesh Lips, the Mandarin also have a noticeable mouth that is seen taking form on their face. The mouth symbolizes the pain and insanity vocalized by Mary, but taking a different context when applied to James. symbolizing his desire to escape from Mary as he feels trapped and unable to escape this prison of his own creation. The Mandarin is inspired by the Japanese Mandarin, a bureaucrat appointed as a general in Imperial China. Masahiro Ito thought that the outfit, specifically their arms, contributed to much of the Mandarin's design. After exploring more of the Otherworld South Vale, James finds a payphone with a note and a wrench. With the wrench, James uses it to unlock and go through the gate to escape through a tunnel to revisit Rosewater Park. While here, James once again regroups with Angela, finding her staring at the statue of Jennifer Carroll, an important figure who was one of the founding members of the cult's The Order. As Angela admires the statue, James asks Angela if she's feeling better, with her telling him that she doesn't think that her mother is here anymore. Angela believes that her mother doesn't want to see her anymore, loosely implying her strained relationship with her mother as she abandoned her years ago. To lighten the mood, James states that, at the very least, he's happy to see her alive. Before she heads off again, James asks Angela if she's seen a little girl, referring to Laura. However, Angela is fazed as she sees a figure implying her father or the manifestation of her father, the abstract daddy, stalking her from the bushes. This triggers a trauma response, which sees her run away shortly after. After this exchange, James digs up a box buried beneath the ground, receiving the Silent Hill Historical Society key. Inside Silent Hill Historical Society, James finds a handful of historical paintings and photographs depicting the historical landmarks, events, and people that comprise much of the early history of Silent Hill. The Little Baroness refers to the ship that went out on a voyage in Toluca Lake in November 1918. During this voyage, mysterious and supernatural circumstances arose as the ship suddenly vanished, fated to sink, and unfortunately, killed all 14 passengers on board. The Wiltse coal mine was a mining facility conducting mining operations around the 1850s. That was crucial in revitalizing much of Silent Hill's funds, as funding was initially backed by Silent Hill Prison, until its foreclosure. However, these operations lasted until the 1900s, which not only saw the closure of the Wiltse coal mine, but eventually Toluca Prison. Due to these events, Silent Hill would shift to becoming a tourist town to reap those lost funds and use them as a means to reproduce financial revenue to stay afloat. Toluca Prison Camp was originally made to hold POWs during the American Civil War of 1862. After the war, Toluca Prison was later repurposed as a normal prison, widely known as Toluca Prison. The prison would eventually close due to unknown circumstances in the 1900s. During its time, it housed many prisoners on the upper and lower floors in different districts, such as housing a library, showers, a chapel, and executions for spectators to watch as they get either electrocuted or hanged by a noose. Brookhaven Hospital was originally constructed to aid those who became susceptible to an unforeseen epidemic that plagued many of the townspeople who caught a deadly disease. As the disease killed out those living there, one by one, the town settlers fled the town until the disease subsided. As decades passed, the town was eventually resettled as a penal colony in the early 1800s. The start for a new beginning wouldn't last long, as the town once again became susceptible to a new disease that spread rapidly amongst the townspeople. Brookhaven Hospital would reopen to combat this new disease and house those who became ill. During the Civil War, those wounded in battle would be sent to Brookhaven Hospital to be treated for their wounds. Throughout the years, the tragedy of disease and death from the war, Brookhaven Hospital repurposed its base of operations as a predominantly mental institution to treat those who were mentally insane or mentally unwell. Elsewhere in Silent Hill Historical Society is the painting Misty Day Remains of the Judgement, a painting that depicts Pyramid Head, standing ominously with his great spear, with hanged corpses and metal cage-like structures. This painting reflects the town's executioners from the early history of Silent Hill. These executioners are depicted in the painting Crimson and White Banquet for the Gods, wearing white robes and red hoods that were part of the cult's The Order, specifically the Valtiel sector. The Valtiel sector served under the belief that Valtiel was the saint who corresponded to that of an angel who served under God. It was believed that Valtiel was connected and derived from the figure in Jewish mysticism known as Metatron, often described as the highest of angels, with various roles including celestial scribe and mediator between God and humanity, serving as the guide and speaker for God to lead humanity to salvation in its presence. Likewise, Pyramid Head bears a resemblance that loosely adopts the presence of the Valtiel sector, such as his pyramid head-shaped helmet, butcher's apron, and white gloves. Before her illness and during their vacation trip to Silent Hill, James and Mary visited the Silent Hill Historical Society. One of the paintings that fascinated James was Misty Day Remains of the Judgement, depicting the town's executioners from its early history, serving as an inspiration to have James subconsciously derive this manifestation meant to act as the executioner of judgment, subjecting himself to undergo this guilt and desire for punishment. James needs Pyramid Head as a brutal yet harsh reminder of his sins and crimes committed towards Mary, to make him accept and acknowledge the truth of his actions. Pyramid Head, while appearing as an antagonistic threat and force of nature, is made to symbolize James's internal struggle and conflict with reconciling with his past actions, but simultaneously humanizes him by learning to accept his repressed trauma and letting go by moving on from his pain and suffering. After James finishes exploring the Silent Hill Historical Society, he descends deep into the tunnel that leads to Toluca Prison. In doing so, James must jump down large, gaping holes that descend further into Toluca Prison, symbolizing James's literal and figurative descent into the depths of his mental psyche to reach further to the truth. James eventually finds himself in the cafeteria of Toluca Prison, finding Eddie sitting down by a wall, talking to himself with an unhinged and psychotic behavior as he points a gun to his head, stating that killing someone is no big deal when you put a gun to their head and pull the trigger. Taken aback by Eddie's abrupt yet disturbing demeanor, James calmly asks Eddie if he killed the guy lying dead on the table. Eddie states that his reasoning for killing him was self-defense, as the guy looked at him with a look in his eyes that made fun of Eddie. James, in disbelief, tells Eddie he can't kill someone just because of the way they look at him. After a long, ominous, and anxious silence, Eddie reveals that he was joking all along, telling James that he has errands to run, leaving the cafeteria, leaving James in confusion and horror. This interaction with Eddie is meant to solidify Eddie's erratic and psychopathic behavior towards those who bullied him throughout his life. Showing this buildup and restraint for being picked on led to Eddie lashing out and becoming out of control. Their irrational and violent behavior. It's through this mental breakdown that he rationalizes the use of killing someone with a gun that ends his problems. After this interaction, James finds himself in the dark, desolate halls and floors of Toluca Prison, where he must collect 6 weights to solve the scale puzzle to retrieve the execution lever. James retrieves the heaviest weight in the altar of the chapel, the medium weight in the death chamber, the heavy weight inside a hole in the showers, the light weight upon using the typewriter, and finally, the lightest weight in cell F6. Once completing the puzzle, he retrieves the execution lever to activate the gallows puzzle. On the podium, James finds 6 poems telling a tale of 6 prisoners who are guilty of their crimes, with one of them deemed as innocent. James must choose the correct poem in which he finds the prisoner to be innocent. Once chosen, James then has to choose the correct noose to walk up to it and then pull down on it. If James made the right decision, James will then fall down the trap door, falling through another hole and landing in a different part of Toluca Prison. From here, James must drop down more holes to descend further into the labyrinth. James then finds himself in a long hallway that seemingly feels endless, with how liminal and foreboding the pathway seems to be. Eventually, James finds a hallway that leads to a door with various newspapers scattered everywhere. One newspaper specifically mentions a man named Thomas Orosco, found murdered on his chair with his neck receiving multiple stab wounds and his left side of the stomach slit open. This newspaper report refers to Angela and her undergoing a mental breakdown after years of torment and abuse, leading her to finally kill her father. Inside the apartment, James finds Angela in her room, sitting on the floor, crying. Angela tells James that he's coming and to tell him that she'll be good, referring to the next monster as Abstract Daddy. Moments later, the Abstract Daddy forces itself onto James and pushes him down, leaving James to quickly rebalance his position and prepare to battle. The monster is a manifestation of Angela's sexual trauma and abuse inflicted by her father and brother. The monster has a vague but noticeable outline of an intimate posture of 2 figures wrapped in flesh, depicting one on top of the other on a bed frame. The figure lying on the bottom is represented as Angela, as there is a visual of a mouth that screams in agony, with the other figure on top symbolizing her father. It's important to note that while it's implied through subtle visual imagery and slight context clues through Angela's behavior and mannerisms, James has no idea or clue that she's a victim of trauma and abuse. James's interpretation of the monster is derived from the subconscious thoughts and memories he had when visiting Mary and seeing her sick and bedridden. Angela's manifestation of her father is completely different from what James sees and is left ambiguous, as Masahiro Ito admits that the interpretation of Angela's manifestation of the Abstract Daddy is far more disturbing, left up to interpretation from the player. Angela's trauma can be further speculated as James progresses through the boss fight, as much of the time spent in this area is in abstract, visual imagery constructing Angela's childhood home. For example, there's a closet with a makeshift room with a carved out hole to squeeze through, with a bed and teddy bear. This alludes to Angela hiding from her father and brother from the physical and sexual abuse as a safe space for her when she had nowhere else to go. Furthering this abstract, visual imagery of her abuse and trauma are the TVs James is meant to destroy. which plays distorted and inaudible audio of Thomas Orosco emotionally and verbally lashing out against Angela. James destroying the TV is meant to be a metaphor for when Thomas destroys the TV when he's drunk and angry. After a long, arduous battle, James finally weakens the abstract Eddie enough for Angela to deal the final blow, ending this pain and trauma inflicted by this manifestation of her father. While James tries to reassure Angela that it's fine and she's safe, she still finds herself in a defensive and helpless state, projecting her hatred and skepticism towards James, believing that all men are the same, only wanting one thing, much like her father. Angela mocks James by stating that he doesn't want his wife back and doesn't want her around anymore, probably finding someone else. After James shouts at her because of her comment, Angela regresses to her vulnerable state, telling him that she needs to find her mama. After this heartbreaking scene, James eventually finds himself in a room with a four-sided cube that acts as a puzzle. This four-sided cube will let James access 3 new areas, called the Rotten Area, the Desolate Area, and the Ruin Area. Before venturing into the labyrinth, James once again finds Maria, seen to be completely fine and healthy, as if she never had died. Much to James' shock, he asks her how she is possibly even alive. Maria finds James's question to be confusing, stating that she doesn't remember what he's talking about and that she's always been okay. Adding to this confusion, Maria remembers how James could be so forgetful, such as the time he forgot the videotape he made of their stay in Silent Hill. Left in a state of shock and disarray, James asks Maria if she's even Maria. Disturbingly, Maria states that she's not his Mary, but she can be if he wants her to be. Maria touches James's face by stating that she's real, reassuring him as she places his hand on her left cheekbone to feel her warmth. She sexually implies to James if he wants to touch her, with him replying that he doesn't know. Before leaving, James says he'll find a way to rescue her. At this point in time, there's this inner conflict with James as he's in the state of disillusion and uncertainty, as Maria's emotionally manipulative and suggestive sexual nature serve as temptation and desire, meant to stir James from his path in finding the truth if Mary is still alive, waiting for him. As James continues throughout the labyrinth, he finds himself having to solve puzzles in each respective area to progress. In the Rotten Area, James encounters an oddly placed office space meant to be derived from his memories working as an office clerk, likely during the time before and after Mary became ill to support them. In the Desolate Area, James encounters Pyramid Head and finds his quarters, more specifically, his other half of the Great Knife, meant to reinforce the connection to James and Pyramid Head, as they are 2 halves of the same pair. Finally, in the Ruin Area, James must fight through hordes of monsters in 3 rounds. As each round passes, the environment becomes more in a state of despair and ruin, symbolically representing each stage in James and Mary's collapsing relationship as Mary's illness worsens over time. Afterward, James finds Maria in the room he previously discovered her in, only to be shocked and left in despair as he finds her dead once again, lying on the bed with bruises and boils all over her body, tormenting James as a reminder of the illness Mary went through and as a means to derive this eternal punishment he desires. Assuming Maria is dead, James heads forward in his journey to find Mary once again. As he's leaving, James finds the Great Knife embedded into the rubble, wielding the Great Knife to open the path that blocks him, as the mannequin-like limbs slowly dissipate over time. Further into the labyrinth, James finds a cemetery depicting people he has previously seen, such as Walter Sullivan or Miriam Locane. But what catches him off guard are 3 gravestones that have the following names: Angela Orosco, Eddie Dombrowski, and James Sunderland. At his tombstone, there's a grave dug open and for James to jump into. Without hesitation, he jumps down below. James finds himself further into this elongated hallway, only to find a grotesque and disturbing imagery of blood covering the area as he reaches the door at the end of the hallway. James opens the door to find Eddie looming over a corpse, with the revolver in his hand. Eddie talks to the corpse in a hostile and relenting manner, projecting his anger and pain that he suffered from those who bullied him growing up into adulthood. Cautiously approaching Eddie, James asks Eddie what he's doing. Without hesitation, Eddie projects this repressed and emotional trauma with rage to then lash out at James. Eddie comes to the revelation that it doesn't matter who you are, disgusting, overweight, or ugly, because the bullying won't matter once those who bullied you are dead. Eddie's long-term solution is one filled with violence and hostility through the use of killing someone. However, this is from someone who isn't able to function or rationalize the morality behind their actions. In some twisted way, Eddie could be a reflection of James, at least in the context of James losing control and resorting to violence in an irrational way to solve his problems. The irony is that James does do this with Mary, as the years of verbal and emotional abuse resulted in him killing his wife by suffocating her with a pillow. Even though James's actions are irredeemable, his morality is left in a gray area, as his intentions were out of mercy and love to end her pain and suffering. It's a dichotomy of James's moral and ethical behavior that is left to interpretation, contrasted with other characters such as Eddie or Angela when it comes to their actions that result in these consequences left behind. With the tensions and stakes rising, James defaults to having to punch Eddie in the face. After being punched, Eddie runs off into the freezer room, awaiting James to engage in battle. With hesitation and conflict over the inevitability of having to kill Eddie, a human being, James is left with no other choice but to kill Eddie. After a long battle, James finally kills Eddie, leaving himself to question the morality of his actions and live with this weight on his shoulders. As James exits outside to the dock, he walks to the end of the loading bay to find a boat, entering the boat to row himself to Lakeview Hotel. After spending some time rowing himself across Toluca Lake, James arrives at the back entrance of Lakeview Hotel. As James wanders the gardens, the memories of his time here slowly start to trickle and come back to him, stating that this place hasn't changed in 3 years. Inside the hotel, he finds a piano sitting in the corner. Examining the piano, James reminisces about the time when Mary would play the piano. Even if she wasn't the best piano player, it was in that moment of seeing her happy that made him happy. As James is lost in thought, he's surprised by Laura as she scares him. James makes a call back to Laura's insults and rude behavior towards him, referring to him as a fart face and locking him inside a room. Laura insists that she was playing and messing around and didn't mean it, finding James not too bad. Laura mentions to James that the letter she received from Mary was real, giving him the letter to read. As James reads the letter, we hear an internal monologue in Mary's voice. In this letter, Mary states that she's going to a quiet, beautiful place, hoping that Laura can forgive her for not being able to say goodbye. Before the letter ends, she tells Laura to be patient and kind to James, as even though he may be complex, he's a kind and gentle person deep down inside. If things worked out differently, she would have adopted Laura as she saw her as the daughter she never had. As the letter ends, Mary tells Laura, "Happy 8th birthday." Thinking to himself, James asks Laura how old she is, to which she reveals that she turned 8 years old last week. With this revelation, James realizes that Mary couldn't have died 3 years ago, and rather, she could possibly still be alive. James ponders if Mary could be referring to Lakeview Hotel as the special place she referred to. Laura mentions that Mary talked about her and James's time in Silent Hill, wanting to come back with her and him one day. Laura remembers that Mary had written James a letter and she held it on for him. Giving James the letter, he finds it empty. Laura realizes she must have lost the letter, running away to go find it. After James has to solve a series of puzzles throughout the different floors of the hotel, he eventually comes to find the Cinderella figurine. As he picks it up, he's met with a Mandarin. After defeating the monster, James finds himself on the employee floor, unlocking the locker safe to get the videotape called Silent Hill that he recorded during his time with Mary when they visited. After retrieving the Cinderella, Little Mermaid, and Snow White figurines, James inserts them into the music box and eventually solves the puzzle to receive the Room 312 key. With the Room 312 key, James locks the door to the hotel room he and Mary visited. James finds a videotape player sitting beside the TV. He inserts the VHS tape and sits down in anticipation and fear as he looks at the screen. The videotape shows Mary sitting on a chair, glancing at the window, lost in thought. She reminisces about the time here, bringing her a sense of peace and tranquility. Mary tells James she hopes they can both go back to Silent Hill one day. Out of nowhere, Mary starts coughing. The videotape then abruptly shifts to a distorted and manipulated tape that shows the moment James took Mary's life. Mary's shown lying on her bed, where we see James kiss Mary on the head, to then suffocating her with a pillow. As the tape ends, James finds himself speechless and lost for words, mentally and physically exhausted but detached from reality, realizing the weight of the situation as he comes to terms that he killed his wife. Without a moment to grieve and reconcile with his pain, Laura abruptly stumbles upon James, finding him sitting alone with his thoughts. Laura asks James if he has found Mary, to which James reveals that Mary's dead because he killed her. Laura grows angry and lashes out at James, stating that he's a killer and that she hates him. Laura asks James why he did it. However, James stays quiet with no response. Laura runs away crying, leaving James to become disassociated and emotionally empty. After some time, the Lakeview Hotel shifts from the other world to the Fog World Lakeview Hotel. It's revealed that the Lakeview Hotel burned down due to misconduct with a heater, presumably malfunctioning and catching fire underneath the curtain, which led to a chain of events that saw the hotel completely engulfed and consumed by flames. The aftermath of the fire shows the Lakeview Hotel dilapidated, burned, and abandoned. As James snaps back to reality, he receives a message from Maria begging him to come find her elsewhere in the hotel, waiting for him to come save her. With not much else left, James decides to make amends for his sins by saving Maria. James roams cautiously in the debris-filled hallways of what remains of Lakeview Hotel, descending further to the floor below, until reaching the elevator to navigate to the employee floor, filled with nothing but water. After trudging through the waters, James eventually finds Angela standing still as she looks up the stairs to see everything burning in flames. James walks towards Angela, only to see Angela mistake James as her mama, saying how much she missed her. After looking intently at James, she suddenly realizes it's not her mother, and instead James. Left in disappointment and defeat, James tells Angela that he's sorry, and what they're both looking for is not here anymore. Angela tells James that she's thankful for his help earlier, but tells him that he wishes he hadn't. Angela states that her mother told her that she deserved it, likely paraphrasing comments that her mother told Angela before she left the family, when her mother witnessed her father abusing her. James tells Angela that isn't true, but Angela retorts with the harsh reality of no one being able to save her, love her, care for her, and heal her of all her pain. Not even James. Angela tells James to give her back the knife, but James refuses, questioning him if he's going to use the knife on himself, leaving him only speechless and quiet. As Angela walks up the stairs, James mentions that it's hot as hell in here, with Angela giving a haunting response, saying that for her, it's always like this. A metaphor for Angela's hope of finding that answer to heal her wounds of the trauma she suffered since her youth to be burning down, much like her life. In her final moments, fire slowly engulfs Angela in flames as she ascends the stairs, leaving James to find Maria. In the last save room, James finds himself in a room with 9 red squares looming over him ominously. These 9 red squares serve as the representation of the 9 delusions that he's encountered in his journey so far. These would be the lying figure, mannequin, pyramid head, bubblehead nurses, flesh lips, Mandarin, abstract daddy, Maria, and Mary. As we see the reflection of James, he reverts his gaze by not looking directly into the red square, implying that he's scared and hesitant to uncover and reveal the truth. But because James killed or witnessed the manifestations that derive from his subconscious of the fears, trauma, and memories centered around Mary, it allowed him to remember his actions and repent for his consequences by understanding that he's human. In the next room over, James opens the door to find Maria hanging upside down in a metal cage frame, with 2 pyramid heads standing next to her, side by side. As James pleads to them not to kill her and to leave them alone, they pierce the great spear into her chest, which has James yell and fall to his knees in defeat. In this moment of clarity, James realizes what Pyramid Head is, and comes to accept that Pyramid Head is the part of him that seeks punishment for his guilt in killing Mary. As James learns and remembers what he's done, he also gains perspective and acceptance, learning to accept that the deepest and darkest parts derived from his subconscious may be a part of him, but doesn't necessarily mean it defines him. As James commences in battle with the twin Pyramid Heads, they come to accept defeat, walking towards James and simultaneously piercing the great spears into their heads. James acquires the scarlet egg and the rusted color egg and inserts them into the twin doors. James then walks down a long, dark, ominous hallway with a voice that sounds like Mary. In this memory, Mary acts bitter and cold towards James as she sees him bringing her flowers, while she lies in bed ill. Mary, clouded by her judgment, denies his advances to emotionally support her and instead lashes out at him. As James is about to leave Mary, she has a second thought as he doesn't want him to go, pleading to him to stay with her and tell her that she'll be okay. As James descends the stairwell to the top floor, he finally finds Mary, awaiting him as she looks out into the white fog. James, stunned and shocked to see Mary waiting for him, shouts her name as she turns around quickly, running to hug each other. As they embrace, James laments how much he missed her, with Mary reciprocating these feelings. As they hold each other, Mary makes a comment about how they can finally be together forever. This comment makes James suddenly realize that this Mary isn't her, but instead, Maria. James backs away and apologizes, saying how much he is sorry for the trouble he has put her through, but reaffirms to her that this nightmare has to end, and it's time to let go. Maria, angered by his comment, states that she can't let him go, but also the part of her that reconciled with the pain and anguish Mary has been through. Acknowledging that Maria and Mary are one and the same, Maria then shifts into the manifestation that reveals her true form, which embodies the conflicting thoughts that James had towards Mary in her final days before she died, but also the complex emotions Mary had of her predicament as she saw her life stolen and taken away from her. The metal cage frame is meant to represent the confinement Mary had when she spent her long-term illness trapped to a bed. Her appearance reflects the sick, ill, and deceased body that imitates that of a corpse, encompassing the themes of rot, desolation, and ruin, which we've seen throughout the story. One of Maria's attacks is a large, tendril-like tentacle that strangles James, reflecting the asphyxiation Mary received when James was suffocating her as she struggled to breathe. After a long, heartfelt, and emotional battle, James sees Maria fall to the ground in pain, repeating James's name, beckoning him to come to her aid. James, understanding what he must do, finally ends Maria's pain. James finds himself in a room with a bedridden Mary, lying in bed as she struggles to breathe and is fatigued from her illness. James tells Mary he's sorry for killing her when he didn't have the right to. Mary counters this with her wanting the pain to end. Even though James acknowledges this sentiment, he states that the reason he killed her was that he hated her. Mary says, if that's true, then why do you look so sad? Mary then gives James a letter that is meant for him to read, the one he was trying to find ever since Laura mentioned it to him. As he holds the letter, he watches Mary pass away once again, but this time, peacefully. Afterward, we see James find Laura where they first met, handing the letter to her so she can read it for herself. In this letter, we hear Mary's thoughts and fears as she suffered the years of torment with the illness she had. She says that the behavior she inflicted on James was not out of spite, bitterness, or resentment, but because she was scared of dying and leaving a life they were meant to have together. She acknowledges her behavior, feeling the emotional baggage and beratement James may have shown to her in her time of despair. If he doesn't accept her apology, she'll understand, and that she'll always love him. In her final words before she says goodbye, she tells James to continue living on for himself and for others he cares about, and to spend the life he wanted, even if it is without her. Mary tells James that he made her happy. James and Laura, now together, leaving the town of Silent Hill, walking into an unknown future for what lies ahead of them.